Part 1. The River of Lost Girls. Chapter 1. The River That Kept a Secret. The Green River in Washington State does not look like a place where nightmares are born. It meanders lazily through forests and neighborhoods, past factories and quiet parks, past concrete bridges that hold the weight of commuters rushing to work every morning. On summer afternoons, sunlight turns the surface of the river into glistening glass. Kids skip stones. Joggers run along the paths. Couples walk slowly, hands linked, exchanging soft laughter. But in the early 1980s, the Green River was becoming something else entirely. A graveyard, a silent witness, a place where the water itself seemed to swallow screams. On July 15, 1982, a man walking along the riverbank spotted something pale and unfamiliar drifting in the current. He thought, like so many others would soon think, that it was a mannequin, a discarded display figure, something artificial. Nobody ever wants to believe the first terrible possibility. But as the man stepped closer, the shape rotated gently with the flow of the river, and a pair of lifeless eyes stared upward. It was not a mannequin. It was a young woman, naked, bruised, thrown away like trash. And within just a few days, more bodies would surface, one after another, a gruesome pattern emerging like a monster rising from deep black waters. The news spread through Washington like lightning. Fear seeped into neighborhoods. Women stopped walking alone at night. Parents warned their daughters not to go near the highway. Police officers whispered among themselves, "We have a serial killer." And they were right. He would be called the Green River Killer. He would become one of the deadliest predators in American history. And for nearly 2 decades, he would hunt unnoticed. But at that time, in 1982, his name was still unknown. He was nothing more than a shadow, a presence that moved in the dark, along highways, behind motels, under bridges. The Green River swallowed his victims, and the world had yet to understand that a monster had awakened. Chapter 2. Birth of a Future Predator. To understand how this nightmare began, we must step away from the river and return decades earlier, to a small house in Salt Lake City, Utah, where a boy named Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949. There was nothing extraordinary about the Ridgway family from the outside. The father, Thomas, was a bus driver, quiet, often tired from long working hours. The mother, Mary, worked at a department store, strict, volatile, emotionally intense. Gary was the second of 3 boys. But the emotional landscape of the Ridgway household was anything but ordinary. A mother's fury. Mary Ridgway ruled the household with iron discipline. She was controlling, explosive, easily angered over the smallest mistake. Unwashed dishes, late homework, spilled milk. Her punishments were loud, humiliating, and unpredictable. Gary grew up in an environment where affection was mixed with rage, where the person who was supposed to protect him also frightened him. One painful detail would later haunt psychologists studying his case. Gary wet the bed well into his teens, and each time, his mother, furious, ashamed, would scrub him clean in the bathtub, pulling him by the arm, scolding him, leaning over his naked body as he shivered with humiliation. The mix of shame, confusion, and proximity created warped emotional associations that would echo through his adult life. He later said, "My mom used to yell at me and wash me when I wet the bed. I hated it. But I also felt something else, something wrong. That wrong feeling became a seed, one that would grow silently for years. A father's silence." Thomas Ridgway was the opposite, quiet to the point of absence. He rarely showed affection, rarely intervened, rarely lifted his voice. He simply existed in the house, like a piece of furniture. Gary's emotional needs were unmet, and unmet needs often turn into something dangerous. He once said, "I never felt important, not to them, not to anyone." One day, that craving for importance would twist into something monstrous, into something lethal. Chapter 3. The Early Signs. Even as a child, Gary showed disturbing tendencies nobody connected at the time. He stabbed a young boy when he was just 16. The victim survived, but Gary showed no remorse, no fear, no empathy. He killed animals. He carved wounds into the bark of trees. He followed girls home from school. Inside his mind, a storm was brewing. Quiet, invisible, but growing stronger each year. Most importantly, Gary learned something. He could detach, completely. Where emotions should be, there was a void. Where guilt should be, there was silence. Where empathy should be, there was nothing. And that nothingness would become his greatest weapon. Chapter 4. A Man Nobody Noticed. As Gary moved into adulthood, something surprising happened. He blended in perfectly. He graduated. He joined the Navy. He traveled abroad. He married his high school girlfriend. He divorced. He remarried. He divorced again. To everyone around him, Gary Ridgway was forgettably normal. He worked as a truck painter, reliable, punctual, obedient. His coworkers called him quiet, ordinary, boring. He read the Bible. He talked about God. He cried sometimes, fake tears to appear emotional. He smiled politely. He helped neighbors with yard work. But beneath this mask, something else lived. A predator waiting for darkness. A hunter cataloging potential victims. A man who drove along Highway 99 at night, watching women walk alone under neon motel lights. Gary grew obsessed with runaways, homeless girls, sex workers. They were vulnerable. They trusted strangers. They disappeared without drawing attention. To Ridgway, they were perfect prey. He later confessed, "They were easy to pick up, easy to kill, easy to forget." He believed he was doing the world a favor. That belief transformed him. He was no longer just a man. He was evolving into a monster. Chapter 5. 1982. The First Kill. On a humid summer night in 1982, Gary picked up a teenage girl near South 188th Street in Washington. She was tired, hungry, desperate for money. Gary smiled gently, offering her a ride. She entered his truck. That was the last choice she ever made. He drove her into the woods, away from the road, away from the lights. When she turned to look at him, he wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed, slowly, deliberately, watching the life drain from her eyes. He dumped her by the river. Then he went home. He ate dinner with his wife. He watched television. He went to bed. And the next morning, he went back to work as if nothing had happened. He discovered something inside himself that night. Killing felt natural. Killing felt easy. Killing made him feel alive. And so he did it again, and again, and again. The Green River was becoming a graveyard, and Gary Ridgway was only beginning. Chapter 6. The Women the World Forgot. Gary targeted women society ignored. Runaways, drug users, homeless girls, sex workers, teenagers escaping violence at home, women living on the edge of survival. He offered them a ride, a meal, money, safety, a place to sleep. All lies. They trusted him because he looked harmless, soft-spoken, average, fatherly. But inside his truck, the door locks clicked, the smile faded, and the mask fell. He later said, "I looked into their eyes while I killed them. That was the best part. To him, they weren't people. They were objects, targets, opportunities. The Green River Killer had begun his spree, and nothing could stop him. Chapter 7. The Green River Task Force is born. By the end of 1982, the bodies began piling up. Police found victims near Star Lake, Highway 99, Des Moines Memorial Drive, parks and forests, ravines and riverbanks. The public was terrified. Women refused to walk alone. Daughters stopped hitchhiking. The media swarmed the area. So the police formed something unprecedented, the Green River Task Force, one of the largest serial killer investigations in U.S. history. Hundreds of officers, dozens of detectives, millions in funding, years of evidence, and still, they couldn't find him. Ridgway was interviewed twice. He passed a polygraph test. He smiled politely. He explained he simply picked up girls to talk to them. Police let him go. He went back to killing. Chapter 8. The monster hides in plain sight. Between 1982 and 1985, Gary killed relentlessly. He strangled his victims with his hands, ropes, wire, torn clothing. He dumped them in clusters, creating dump sites for police to find. Sometimes he returned to the bodies days later. Sometimes he performed acts on the corpses. Sometimes he moved them to new locations just to confuse investigators. To him, this was a game, a thrill, a secret life that gave him purpose. Yet at home, he was a loving husband, a calm neighbor, a hard-working employee. His third wife believed he was the perfect partner. The truth was buried along the riverbanks. Chapter 9. The river accepts more victims. By 1984, the death toll was rising so fast the media could no longer keep up. Bodies came in waves. Some were half buried. Some were left in forests. Some were nothing but bones. Some were fresh. And the killer learned something powerful. Police were overwhelmed. He realized they couldn't keep up with him. He realized he could kill more often, with less fear. He accelerated. He hunted with efficiency. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other ready to strike. And still, nobody suspected him. Chapter 10. Ted Bundy helps the task force. In a twist straight out of fiction, police turned to another monster for help, Ted Bundy. Bundy, sitting on death row in Florida, spoke with the Green River Task Force. He offered insights into Ridgway's psychology. He's revisiting the bodies. He keeps souvenirs. He's killing in clusters. He feels superior. He's enjoying the fear he causes. Bundy said, "You're looking for someone low-key, someone average, someone who seems harmless." He was describing Gary Ridgway without knowing it. Police didn't realize how accurate Bundy's description was. Not yet. But the river did. The forest did. And soon, the rest of the world would too. Part 2. The Hunter of Highway 99. Chapter 11. The Highway of Disappearing Women. Highway 99 in the 1980s was a world within a world, a place that existed on the margins of society. A strip of neon motels, cheap diners, pawn shops, liquor stores, adult cinemas, run-down parking lots, and cars cruising slowly past women who walked the sidewalks like ghosts. It was a place filled with stories nobody asked to hear. Runaways escaping violent homes, single mothers desperate for cash, teenagers addicted to drugs, women whose families had forgotten them long ago, women who had nobody to call when they went missing. At night, headlights slid over worn pavement, lighting up faces for a second before plunging them back into shadow. And somewhere in that darkness, Gary Ridgway hunted. He drove slowly, scanning the sidewalks with a calm, steady gaze. His truck rolled past clusters of women standing under flickering streetlights. Some leaned into car windows, offering services. Some simply stared blankly at the road, lost in thoughts or fear. Gary watched them all. He knew exactly what he wanted. He knew which victims were the easiest. He knew who was alone. He knew who wouldn't be missed. Sometimes he bought them food. Sometimes he offered money. Sometimes he pretended to be kind. He was a predator wrapped in the camouflage of a working-class man. His eyes never left the road. His hands rested calmly on the wheel. His voice was soft, polite, even shy. Nobody suspected the danger. When one woman entered his truck, the door lock clicked. That sound became her death sentence. Chapter 12. I looked into their eyes as they died. Once inside the truck, Gary had a routine, a twisted ritual he repeated again and again with cold precision. He would drive the woman to an isolated spot, wooded trails, dead-end service roads, hidden turnouts, abandoned construction sites, the banks of the Green River. When he found a quiet area, he parked the truck. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he struck with sudden, brutal force. He wrapped his hands around the woman's throat, squeezing tightly. His grip was relentless. He didn't stop until he watched life leave her eyes. He later confessed, "Strangling gave me time to look at them, time to think, time to enjoy it." The police would learn that Ridgway often killed his victims from behind. He didn't want to see their faces as they struggled. But once they were dying, or dead, he turned them to look into their eyes. He wanted control. He wanted dominance. He wanted total submission. He said, "I liked watching the fear. It made me feel powerful." For many victims, their last sight was Gary Ridgway's calm, empty expression, the face of a man who felt nothing at all. Chapter 13. Dump Sites, the Forest of the Dead. Ridgway never left bodies randomly. He had systems, patterns, clusters. Police later discovered multiple dump sites, grim stretches of Washington forest where bodies lay hidden among moss, leaves, and branches. Gary picked locations that had dense trees, soft soil, easy access from the road, privacy, silence. He dragged the bodies deep into the woods, often leaving them in groups. It was easier to revisit them that way. Yes, he revisited them. Ridgway often returned to the dump sites days or weeks later, sometimes to move a body, sometimes to restage it, sometimes for darker reasons the police could barely describe. He admitted, "I went back because the feeling wasn't done yet." Investigators would later say, he treated the forest as his personal graveyard. Chapter 14. The task force grows desperate. By 1983, the Green River Task Force was drowning in leads, suspects, interviews, and autopsy reports. Bodies were appearing faster than they could be processed. Clues were scarce. DNA technology was primitive. Victims often had no close family to identify them. Detective Dave Reichert, one of the youngest officers on the case, worked night and day, barely sleeping, driven by a growing obsession: catch the Green River Killer. Reichert and his team sifted through missing persons reports, witness statements, fibers, soil samples, truck tire impressions, hair found on bodies. None of it pointed clearly to one man. Ridgway was interviewed briefly in 1983. He was calm, polite, boring. Investigators noted nothing unusual, except his unnervingly flat demeanor. He even passed a polygraph test. Most of the task force assumed they were searching for someone charismatic, cunning, brilliant, a Ted Bundy type. They weren't. They were hunting a man so average he vanished in plain sight. And while they chased shadows, Gary kept killing. Chapter 15. The Anatomy of a Predator. What made Ridgway so terrifying wasn't his intelligence. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't creative. He wasn't charismatic. He was terrifying because he was methodical, disciplined, unemotional, adaptable, invisible. He was a machine with no moral code. He targeted the vulnerable. He knew which women had nobody looking for them. He knew which victims would be ignored by society. He left little forensic evidence. He killed outdoors. He dumped bodies in nature. Animals often destroyed evidence. Weather erased traces. He practiced control. He rarely left marks that weren't deliberate. He removed evidence. He cleaned his truck often. He planned every movement. He felt no empathy. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He didn't feel guilt. He enjoyed the game. He watched news coverage of his murders. He read headlines. He recorded missing persons reports on TV. He once said, "I was ahead of them, always ahead." And for a long time, he was right. Chapter 16. Shadows in the Woods. Throughout 1983 and 1984, hikers, loggers, and birdwatchers kept stumbling upon bodies. Some were skeletons. Some were recently killed. Some had been dragged or repositioned. Sometimes a skull was found years after the murder, resting quietly in the underbrush, waiting to be discovered. Each discovery tore deeper into the community. Families of victims waited years for answers. Some never got them. Police officers cried at scenes. Detectives carried guilt home every night. Parents banned their daughters from walking near the highway. The region lived in fear. But Ridgway felt only satisfaction. The forest was loyal to him. The river carried his secrets. Nature erased his sins. For now. Chapter 17. The Kill Cycle. Ridgway killed in cycles. Phase 1. Hunting. He cruised Highway 99 at night. He watched for isolated girls, young women who approached cars, women wearing tired expressions, women walking away from crowds. He learned their movements. He waited for the right moment. Phase 2. The Pickup. He spoke softly, acting shy and harmless. He offered food, money, warmth. Women relaxed. They got in the truck. The door locked. Phase 3. The Kill. He strangled them quickly. No hesitation, no passion, just cold efficiency. Phase 4. Transportation. He dragged the body into the passenger seat or bed of his truck. His neighbors never noticed. His co-workers never suspected. Phase 5. Disposal. He dumped bodies in clusters. He arranged them. He revisited them. Phase 6. Normal life. He went home. He kissed his wife. He took his son to school. He went to work. He mowed the lawn. Then he returned to Phase 1. And each time he completed the cycle, it became easier, faster, more satisfying. Chapter 18. The Woman Who Escaped. In 1984, one victim escaped Ridgway, an extraordinary event. Her name was Rebecca, name changed for privacy. Gary picked her up near the highway and drove her toward a wooded area. She noticed something strange in his eyes, something cold. When he reached for her throat, she fought back with ferocity. She bit him, kicked, scratched, punched. She managed to open the truck door and roll onto the ground while the vehicle was still moving. She ran into the forest, bleeding and terrified. She reached a road and flagged down a passing driver. When police interviewed her, she said, "He looked like a normal guy." That phrase haunted detectives. They were searching for a monster, but the monster had an ordinary face. Chapter 19. The task force turns to Bundy. In 1984, desperate and exhausted, the Green River Task Force reached out to an unlikely consultant, Ted Bundy. Bundy, awaiting execution in Florida, studied the case file and offered disturbing insight. He explained, the killer likely revisited the bodies he felt superior to. The police he chose victims he didn't see as people. He was probably married. He was hiding in plain sight. He lived a double life. Bundy even suggested the killer might have sex with corpses. Detectives were horrified. But Bundy was describing Ridgway with shocking accuracy. Bundy said, "You are looking for a man who looks ordinary, but he is not ordinary inside." The task force still didn't know Gary Ridgway's name, but Bundy had just described him perfectly. Chapter 20. The False Suspect, a Near Miss. In 1984, police started closing in on a suspect. He was unusual. He had a violent past. He lived near where victims disappeared. They interrogated him repeatedly. They followed him. They recorded him. But he wasn't the killer. All while police hunted the wrong man, Ridgway continued to kill, quietly smiling to himself as news broke about the main suspect. He later said, "They chased the wrong guy for years. It was funny." His arrogance grew. His confidence deepened. His kills increased. Chapter 21. The Marriage That Hid a Monster. Gary married his third wife, Judith, in 1988. And something strange happened. The killings slowed down. Not because he felt remorse. Not because he grew tired. Not because he lost interest. He slowed down because he finally found a cover that made him feel safe. A stable family life. Judith adored him. She thought he was perfect. She believed he was gentle, affectionate, honest. She had no idea he sometimes returned home with scratches on his arms from women fighting for their lives. She had no clue that her husband drove to the woods in the middle of the night. No clue he visited dead bodies. No clue he fantasized constantly about killing again. Gary lived two parallel lives. Life 1. Loving husband. He cooked dinner. He played with his son. He watched TV with Judith. He prayed before meals. Life 2. Serial killer. He hunted on lonely roads. He strangled vulnerable women. He dragged bodies into forests. He returned to crime scenes. And he preferred Life 2. But Life 1 hid him perfectly. Chapter 22. The Killer Smiles at the Camera. In the early 1990s, Gary Ridgway attended family gatherings, church events, and picnics. Numerous photos captured him smiling, holding plates of food, laughing with relatives. Nobody saw anything unusual. His eyes were plain. His smile was weak but friendly. His posture was relaxed. He looked like a man who wouldn't harm a fly. These photos became infamous later, because behind every smile was a man who had murdered dozens of women and disposed of them like garbage. Detectives who saw the photos years later felt sick. One said, "That's the face of a man who strangled girls and went home to watch TV." Ridgway was the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing. Chapter 23. A Murder Without End. By the mid-1990s, the murders had slowed, but not stopped. Ridgway killed occasionally, when opportunity aligned, when he argued with his wife, when he had free time, when he felt the old hunger returning. He once said, "I killed when I needed to, like eating." Some bodies from the late 1990s were discovered years later, scattered across Washington woods. Police kept working. Leads dried up. Evidence degraded. Detectives retired. New officers took their place. But the killer was still out there, living a normal life. Until 2001, when science finally caught up with him. Chapter 24. DNA Breakthrough. In the early 2000s, DNA technology had transformed criminal justice. Police reopened old evidence from the Green River cases: hair, saliva traces, fibers, bodily fluids. Using modern methods, they isolated a DNA profile from 3 victims. The profile was strong, clear, matchable. They ran it through all known suspects, and one name lit up: Gary Leon Ridgway. The quiet man interviewed decades earlier, the man who passed the polygraph, the man who attended church, the man who smiled softly while talking to police, the man who had murdered dozens of women. Chapter 25. The Arrest, 2001. On November 30th, 2001, Gary Ridgway was arrested outside the truck painting business where he worked. Detectives approached slowly. He stood still, eyes calm. They told him he was under arrest for the murders of 4 women. He didn't panic. He didn't protest. He simply said, "Okay," and then, "I'm done." As if killing were a chore he had finally completed. Officers handcuffed him. He lowered his head. He breathed softly. And the women of Washington, the living and the dead, finally had justice coming. Part 3. The Monster Behind the Mask. Chapter 26. The Interrogation Room. The interrogation room was cold, small, and sterile. A metal table, 3 gray walls, a camera in the corner, and a single dim light humming overhead. Detectives had waited decades for this moment. And now the door opened. Gary Ridgway entered quietly, almost apologetically, like a man walking into a dentist appointment he forgot he scheduled. His expression was flat, emotionless. His shoulders relaxed, his hands calm. There was no fear, no anger, no confusion, only stillness. He sat, folded his hands, exhaled slowly. Detective Reichert, the man who had been chasing the Green River killer for 20 years, studied him with disbelief. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't a genius. This wasn't a charismatic predator. This was a man who seemed barely visible, a man who could disappear in any crowd, a man who nobody would ever suspect. Ridgway waited patiently for the first question. Reichert leaned forward. "Gary, why do you think you're here?" Ridgway looked up, blinked once, and said in a calm, even voice, "Because of the DNA." And with that sentence, the dam broke. Chapter 27. The Confession Begins. Most killers fight. They deny, they bargain, they claim innocence. Not Ridgway. His confession flowed out of him like water pouring downhill, inevitable, unstoppable, smooth. He talked for hours, days, weeks. He didn't resist. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't stutter or hesitate. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment, the moment someone finally asked him to explain who he really was. "I killed them," he said. "All of them. I killed so many I lost count." He said it like he was describing laundry. Detectives listened in horror as he detailed how he chose victims, how he gained their trust, how he strangled them, how he dumped their bodies, how he returned to the scenes, how he ignored missing person reports on TV, how he watched families cry, how he felt nothing. Nothing. His voice remained soft, polite, even warm at times, but the content, The content was darkness incarnate. Chapter 28. Murder by Routine. Ridgway did not kill impulsively. He killed with structure. He killed with purpose. He killed with a system. He told detectives, "I killed like I went to work. It was my second job." A job. That's what murder was to him. He explained his methods step by step. Step 1. Find a vulnerable woman, someone isolated, someone with a tired look, someone who needed money, someone whose trust was easy to gain. Step 2. Gain their trust. He smiled. He spoke softly. He lied. He told police, "They didn't fear me because I seemed harmless." Step 3. Drive them to a secluded spot. The woods, a dead-end road, a hidden trail, an empty lot. Places he knew. Places only he knew. Step 4. Kill quickly and efficiently. No shouting, no theatrics, just cold strangulation. He said, "Using my hands made me feel closer to them." Closer. Step 5. Dispose of the body. He dragged them through brush, dirt, branches. He placed them in clusters intentionally. He said, "It was easier for me to find them later." Step 6. Return. Sometimes the very next day. He visited his victims multiple times, sometimes to move the bodies, sometimes to pose them, sometimes for darker reasons. He returned so often that he left footpaths through the brush, blades of grass pressed flat under his boots. Investigators later followed those paths like trails left by a wolf. Chapter 29. The Necrophilia Revelations. Ridgway's calm tone never changed as he admitted details that made experienced detectives physically ill. He said, "I went back to them. I spent time with them, as long as the bodies weren't too far decomposed." He delivered that line like someone describing leftovers in a fridge. Detectives paused their questioning repeatedly, not because they needed clarification, but because they needed a moment to remain composed. Ridgway continued, emotionless. The bodies didn't argue. They didn't fight. They didn't talk back. The evil was not in the act alone. It was in the emptiness of his voice when he spoke about it. No remorse, no hesitation, no disgust, just nothing. Chapter 30. Why he chose his victims. Detectives eventually asked the question everyone wanted answered. Why these women? Ridgway tilted his head slightly. They were easy, he said. They were vulnerable. They trusted strangers. They needed help. They wouldn't be missed quickly. They had no one to look for them. Then he added, and nobody cared what happened to them. The room fell silent. Ridgway clarified, "That's why I chose them. Not because I hated them personally, because society already threw them away. I just finished the job." To him, they were not people. They were objects, a means for relief, a way to feel power, a way to fill the emptiness inside him. Chapter 31. The Map Inside His Mind. When detectives asked Ridgway to mark locations of bodies on a map, something stunning happened. His memory was perfect. Not just good, not just accurate. Perfect, he remembered. Trees, rocks, parking lots, hidden trails, bends in the river where a log had fallen years ago, where moss grew on a stump, where a victim's shoe ended up, which direction the sun set on the day of disposal. He walked police through forests like a tour guide. Here is where I left her. Here is where I came back. Here is where I dragged her. Here is where I watched her. Here is where I stood. He remembered the locations better than detectives who had investigated the scenes for decades. One investigator said, he remembered every tree, every branch, every shadow. It was like the forest existed only for him. And in his mind, it did. Chapter 32. The coldest moment. There was a moment during interrogation that detectives said they would never forget. A detective asked, "Gary, when was the first time you felt remorse?" Ridgway paused. He blinked slowly. He lifted his head, and then he said, "I never did. Not once. Not for a single victim. Not for a single family. Not for a single life he destroyed." He continued, "I cared about myself, my job, my life, my marriage, not them." Detectives realized then they were not speaking to a human being as they understood it. They were speaking to a void wearing a human mask. Chapter 33. The Psychology of an Empty Man. Psychologists who examined Ridgway described him using chilling terms: emotionally blunted, lacks empathy entirely, hyper-controlled, mechanical, a void. He didn't meet criteria for insanity. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't out of touch with reality. He knew exactly what he was doing. He just didn't care. One psychologist explained, "He does not feel emotions the way we do. He imitates feelings. He studies people's reactions and copies them." This explained why he passed polygraphs, why he fooled detectives, why nobody suspected him. His emotions weren't just shallow, they were manufactured, like counterfeit money, like a mask he adjusted depending on the situation. Chapter 34. The Marriage That Blinded Everyone. His wife, Judith, whom he married in 1988, believed she had found the perfect man. Gary cooked dinner, cleaned the house, mowed the lawn, went to church, attended parenting meetings, wrote her love notes, hugged her every morning. He didn't drink, he didn't cheat, he didn't swear, he didn't raise his voice. He seemed safe, comforting, predictable. She had no idea he slipped out in the middle of the night, no idea he visited forest dump sites, no idea he killed when they argued, no idea the scratches on his arms weren't from work, but from women fighting for their lives. When police told her who her husband really was, she collapsed. She cried until she couldn't breathe. She said, "I slept next to a monster for 17 years. Chapter 35. Ridgway's Pride. During one interrogation session, a detective asked, "Gary, how do you feel knowing you killed more women than any other serial killer in U.S. history?" Ridgway smiled. Not a big smile, not a proud grin, just a small, satisfied curve of the lips. And then he said, "I was good at it." Detectives froze. He continued, "I killed efficiently. I killed quickly. I didn't get caught. I didn't waste time. I didn't make mistakes often." It was like listening to a factory worker explain his productivity. This wasn't just pride, it was ownership. Ridgway saw murder as his skill, his talent, his legacy, and he felt no shame for it. Chapter 36. The Dark Return to the Bodies. One of the most disturbing parts of Ridgway's confession involved what he did after the victims were dead. He returned to the bodies often. Why? He explained, "The kill wasn't over, not until I decided it was." He described walking through silent forests, kneeling beside decomposing bodies, touching them, repositioning them, talking to them, lying next to them, doing unspeakable things. Sometimes he moved a skull from one location to another, just to confuse police. Sometimes he left objects behind deliberately. Sometimes he kept trophies, jewelry, clothing, ID cards. The woods were his kingdom. The river was his accomplice. The dead were his property. Chapter 37. The Countless Unknown Victims. Ridgway officially confessed to 48 murders, but he hinted repeatedly that the true number was higher. Detectives asked him for an exact count. He shook his head. "I stopped counting at 50, he said. "Could be 60, could be 70, could be more." He smiled faintly, then whispered, "Only the river knows." In 2011, 6 more sets of remains were linked to him. Some investigators believe the real number may exceed 90. Chapter 38. The Ultimate Betrayal. His son. Ridgway spoke about his son rarely, but when he did, he revealed a chilling detail. Sometimes he took his young son on family trips into the woods, the same woods where bodies were hidden. He told detectives, "I brought him so people would think I was a good father. Nobody suspects a man with a kid." He would walk with his son, holding his hand, just a few meters from a corpse hidden in the brush. While his son collected rocks, Gary studied the body nearby. Detectives were speechless. Ridgway said, "It made me feel smart." He used his child as camouflage. Chapter 39. The Calmest Killer in History. Throughout interrogation, Ridgway never cried, raised his voice, lost his temper, panicked, hesitated, expressed empathy. He was cooperative because he knew something. Confessing spared him the death penalty. He said, "I'll tell you everything, in exchange for life." He confessed because it benefited him, not the victims, not justice, not morality. He wanted to remain alive. Even in prison, even in a cage, he wanted to continue existing. Chapter 40. The Final Words of a Monster. During one interrogation, late at night, a detective asked the final question. "Gary, what do you feel when you think about the women you killed?" Ridgway stared at the table. Seconds passed. 5, 10, 15. Then he raised his head and said, "I feel nothing." The detective asked, "Nothing at all?" Ridgway repeated, "Nothing." His eyes were flat, dead, unblinking. Detectives realized the truth. There had never been a man sitting across from them, only a body with a void where a soul should have been. Chapter 41. The Trial of a Ghost. In 2003, the world finally saw the face of the Green River Killer. He entered the courtroom flanked by officers, not in chains, not fighting, but walking calmly with the quiet posture of a middle-aged office worker. He wore plain clothes, glasses, and a neutral expression. Reporters whispered, "He looks normal. He looks like a neighbor. He looks like someone's uncle." And that was the most terrifying part. Monsters aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they blend in better than anyone else. Family members of victims filled the courtroom. Many had waited 20 years for this moment. Some came trembling. Some came shaking with rage. Some came holding framed photos of daughters who never returned home. When Ridgway sat down, he didn't look at them. His gaze drifted toward the table, toward his notes, toward the microphones, anywhere but the grieving faces behind him. He was finally cornered, but his emotions remained unreachable. Chapter 42. The Bargain That Saved His Life. The prosecution had overwhelming DNA evidence. If they wanted the death penalty, they could have fought for it. But they needed the truth. They needed answers. They needed closure for families who had spent decades living with uncertainty. So, they struck a deal. Ridgway would confess to every murder he committed, both known and unknown, in exchange for life in prison instead of execution. When asked if he was willing to confess, he said, "I can tell you everything." And then he did. For days, in calm, matter-of-fact tones, he described killings in chilling detail, where he picked up each victim, how they died, where he left them when he returned, what he did afterward. Detectives, hardened by decades of police work, found themselves shaking. Ridgway spoke like he was giving instructions for repairing a sink. The judge asked him, "Why did you kill them?" Ridgway shrugged. "I don't know. It was easy. It made me feel good, and nobody cared about them." Gasps filled the courtroom. Chapter 43. The victims' families speak. After Ridgway's confession, it was time for the families of the victims to speak. One by one, they approached the microphone. Some walked slowly, leaning on canes. Others marched forward with clenched fists. Many held photos or lockets containing the faces of the women they lost. A mother's voice breaking, "You took my baby girl. You strangled her and threw her away. You are less than dust." A brother, shaking with rage, "You left her in the woods like garbage." A father, trying not to cry, "You don't deserve to breathe." Some cursed him. Some sobbed until they could no longer speak. Some simply stared at him with hatred large enough to crush a mountain. But something strange happened. While dozens of grieving voices filled the courtroom, Ridgway remained emotionless. His face didn't tighten, his hands didn't tremble, his breathing didn't change. He stared blankly, like he was watching a documentary about someone else. Until one moment. A father stepped forward, a tall man with gray hair and shaking hands. His daughter was 19 when Ridgway murdered her. He had waited 2 decades to speak. But instead of screaming, he said softly, "I forgive you." The entire room froze. Ridgway lifted his head for the first time. His lips trembled. His eyes filled with tears. He broke down crying, not from guilt, not from remorse, but because forgiveness punctured the cold shell he had built his entire life. Even in that moment, he didn't apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply cried because the one emotion he could not understand, mercy, was shown to him. It was the only time he ever cried in court. Chapter 44. 48. Life sentences. When the time came for sentencing, the judge read the list of victims. 48 confirmed murders. The courtroom sat in silence as each name echoed like a funeral bell. 1 life sentence for each victim. 48 times. Consecutive. Without the possibility of parole. The judge added, "Mr. Ridgway, you are to spend the rest of your life behind bars. You will die in prison, alone and forgotten." Ridgway blinked. He showed no fear, no sadness, no reaction. He simply nodded, as if accepting a new job assignment. Officers placed handcuffs on him slowly. He stood. He did not look back. As he was escorted away, victims' families erupted. Some shouted, "Burn in hell! You coward! You monster! You took everything from us!" Others cried silently, relieved that the nightmare was over. Gary Ridgway, the most prolific serial killer in American history, vanished into the hallways of the courthouse. He would never see freedom again. Chapter 45. Life inside the cage. Ridgway was taken to Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, then later moved to a high-security facility in Colorado for his own protection. Even among murderers, he was hated. Inmates threatened him daily. Some tried to attack him. Guards kept him isolated, 23 hours a day in a concrete cell, 1 hour alone in a fenced yard, meals through a slot. No interaction with others. No sunlight except thin strips through reinforced windows. The man who preyed on vulnerable women now lived in a world where he had zero control. Ironically, he adjusted well. He followed rules. He kept his cell neat. He read the Bible, not for redemption, but for routine. He wrote letters to the few people who corresponded with him. He never expressed remorse, never apologized, never showed guilt. He simply existed, just as he did before, quietly, passively, mechanically. a machine that had been switched off. Chapter 46. The Psychology of the Perfect Predator. Psychologists who studied Ridgway profiled him as a near-perfect storm of traits. 1. Shallow affect. His emotions were mimicry, not genuine. 2. Lack of empathy. He could not comprehend the human cost of his actions. 3. Compartmentalization. He separated his life into two worlds: the good husband, the silent killer. 4. High impulse control. He killed calmly, methodically, without frenzy. 5. Desire for power. Strangulation gave him control he lacked in childhood. 6. Ability to blend in. He was the definition of average, almost invisible. Because of these traits, he avoided detection for nearly 20 years. One profiler said, "He was deadly because he wasn't special." Another added, "He was a ghost in plain sight." Chapter 47. The Legacy of the Green River. The Green River killer case changed America. It advanced forensic DNA science. It reshaped how serial killers are profiled. It forced law enforcement to take crimes against vulnerable women seriously. It showed that monsters do not always look like monsters. Today, the Green River Task Force's headquarters is a museum exhibit. Photos of the victims line the walls: young women, mothers, teenagers, runaways, dreamers. The river still flows quietly. People jog along its banks. Families picnic nearby. Children throw rocks into the water. Most passers-by have no idea how many souls rest beneath that soil. But the families remember. Washington remembers. And the forest remembers. Ridgway wanted to be invisible, but he left behind a trail of death that could never disappear. Chapter 48. The Monster Without a Soul. Ridgway once said, "Killing was my career. I was good at it." He wasn't proud. He simply stated the fact as he saw it. He felt no remorse, no responsibility, no reflection. To the end, he remained hollow, a man who learned to imitate humanity but never possessed it. He will die alone in a cell, likely forgotten by everyone except the families he shattered. But his story remains a chilling reminder. The most dangerous killers are not the loud ones. They are the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones who smile softly and say nothing. Gary Ridgway was not a genius. He was not charming. He was not charismatic. He was ordinary. And that made him the perfect predator.